Welcome to Coffee with the Risk Manager, where we share a cup of coffee with colleagues and discuss risk management in higher education. My name is Stacie Kroll, and I'm the Executive Director for Gallagher's Higher Education Practice. Today, I am so excited to welcome Lisanne Sison. Lisanne, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your expertise?
Sure. Hi, Stacie. I'm Lisanne Sison. I'm Managing Director for Gallagher's Enterprise Risk Management Practice. And as part of that, we help clients of all kinds, but especially higher education institutions, implement an ERM approach or process that helps them identify and manage their risk.
Thank you again for joining me today. So this is Coffee with the Risk Manager, and I have to see your coffee cup. What are you drinking out of today?
So it doesn't show up very well on camera, but it is from one of my best friends, and it says, "I miss precedented times." And don't we all miss precedented times? How about you, Stacie? What are you drinking out of today?
Again, my cup, just like you, is from someone special, and I think the white coffee cups aren't picking up well on the camera, but mine says "a little risk management saved a lot of fan cleaning," and I think that's pretty self-explanatory to our audience. So, all right, so let's dive in. Today, we're talking about renewal submissions. We know the market is in unprecedented times, right? And that underwriting higher ed risks is becoming increasingly complicated for several seemingly compounded reasons. The quality of our renewal submissions are going to be the critical piece in showing markets why our institution should be perceived as a good risk versus a bad risk. And the end goal in this market is to be on the lower end of those ranges. So we also know that submissions are going to be at an all-time high. Not only are our underwriters having to review and price all their renewal, but the clients are marketing products to test those increases. They're exercising their fiduciary responsibility. So, Lisanne, let's explore this concept we've talked about utilizing an ERM heat map to tell your story to the markets.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea behind using a heat map as a marketing tool for yourself in this very challenging market is that it's a way to help other stakeholders be able to absorb a lot of data. And what it does is it enables you to put on one page your different threats and opportunities prioritized in a way that helps organizations get you talked about fiduciary responsibility. It gives them a level of comfort that organizations are identifying, prioritizing, and managing the right risks. It helps show that organizations are using a methodical process that can be used to identify those risks and put together a plan to manage them effectively, which definitely helps them in such a competitive market.
Yeah, I love this idea, right? And I tend to think and learn visually, and therefore I tend to deliver information visually. I find that visual presentation of information, to your point, it allows you to deliver a lot of information in a really concise way, but it also draws your reader in and captures their attention. Alternatively, right, people still love a story, and case studies are a great way to show that you're addressing the risks that underwriters are concerned about today. Personally, my recommendation would be, if we're going to use case studies or an internal strategic plan or anything like that to be articulating this information, I'd caution our audience to keep it brief because of those volume concerns. And specifically identify those things that the underwriters care about, whether it's traumatic brain injury or sexual assault and molestation, COVID response efforts in 2020, or even just the presence of an ERM program on campus.
Yes, Stacie, you're absolutely right. You always have to keep your audience in mind when you are generating information, when you're trying to elicit a particular response, right? So if you're trying to get your institution to be on that lower end of that range of increases, you need to be able to tell that story in different ways. So yes, the heat map is great. It's visual, it's colorful, it gives you a way to break that data up into easily digestible pieces. But that can also lead into a story. And the human brain learns and absorbs information in different ways for different people. Some people, like you, Stacie, are very visual. Others, really need the logic. They need to hear it. They need to be able to write it down, those kinesthetic learners. And there's other people that have emotional responses to risk. And when you're doing these stories and these communications, you also need to remember that emotion is a big part of risk management. There's this fear. There are these folks that are uncomfortable with tracking their risks or writing them down or putting them together in a collection, like it's a map of their vulnerabilities. And I understand that. We're talking about big issues, we're talking about big risks, but the story, getting back to your point, Stacie, is not necessarily here's a list of all my weaknesses, but here's a way that we identify, prioritize risks, and here's some stories around our strength. And that helps your narrative with your stakeholders, not only your underwriters, but also your leadership at your organization and others that benefit from that guidance.
Yeah, I love this concept. I think that's great. I think there's a way you can actually, there's a way you can apply this process and focus your underwriters' attentions on, to your point, the strengths, and then kind of reserve those weaknesses for behind the scenes. And we know that this market's going to be hard for a period of time. So if you can develop this process, develop this through your renewal strategy, you can meet mid-cycle with your underwriter and show them some of those vulnerabilities, but pair those with your risk mitigation efforts that are in place, right? So you recognize that there's work to be done. It is very uncomfortable. It is very vulnerable. And, the emotions can be tied to that. And you're kind of highlighting those weaknesses. But at the same time, that's what risk management is finding those vulnerabilities and addressing them, right? And nobody starts out perfect to begin with.
That's exactly right, Stacie. Just to build on that idea that it's not just about that perfect state. We all know that no organization has unlimited resources. There's finite time, there's finite people, and there's no way that organizations can manage every single risk that they face. The key is to have a way to identify the most important risks and to have a path forward on those. So building on what you're saying, that iterative process about using those maybe mid-year conversations with your underwriters, I think that's a great idea, and being able to use that to demonstrate continuous improvement. And that's a core tenet of enterprise risk management, is continuous improvement, and using that to demonstrate to your underwriters and others that you are in fact a good risk. You understand your exposures, you're managing your exposures effectively, and that makes you a good partner.
Thank you so much for joining us, Lisanne. And to the audience, if you're interested in learning more about how to tell your story or how to craft that narrative, on our Gallagher Higher Education Resource webpage, we have a webinar that we hosted in the spring of 2020, taking a deep dive into how to craft that narrative and some best practices and just good tips. And just as a reminder, you don't have to be a Gallagher client to access Lisanne or I. We're happy to help where we can. As we've said, these are unprecedented times, and our resources are available to the industry as a whole. So thank you so much, Lisanne, for joining me with a cup of coffee and talking about these very important issues.
It was my pleasure. Have a good day.